All right, everybody. Justice is a Process is here, and we are coming live here with a little late night broadcast in honor of the verdict today for Lisa Dykes. This is a case out of Texas I've been following. We're going to watch the state's closing argument because I think this closing argument really encapsulated why she got convicted today, because she was convicted ultimately. And I believe rightly so. Now, there were moments when I was watching this trial and I thought, I think we might have potentially a not guilty verdict here. And then she testified, or should I say testified. And again, one of these decisions, I don't know if it was her attorney who thought it was a good decision, or if she has a legal background, if she thought she could handle it. But she went on that witness stand and flat out lied to the jury and, in my opinion, sealed her fate. Why she would decide to testify if she was going to lie about obvious things, I have no idea. But that's what she did. And it makes no sense. But it's what happened. So we are going to jump in here. And we're going to watch this closing argument, because I think this closing argument, as I mentioned, when you hear the points that the state makes, this was the rebuttal argument. In Texas, state opens, closings, defense gets to close, and then they come back and they close out the trial, and they're the last voice that you hear. So this is the last thing the jury heard. And the jury only deliberated for 1.5 hours. This was a 7-day trial, 1.5 hours. And at first when I heard that, I thought, wow, because I hadn't watched the closing arguments actually yet when I watched the verdict. And I thought, man, that's crazy, 7 days. And for me, I had watched the testimony, but it hadn't necessarily sunk in yet, because there was a couple times in the testimony I thought, well, what the heck? Why is she lying about this? But when the state summarized it all together, they knocked it out of the park. Let's jump in. Let's get started.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury,
and we're listening to this
we discussed that your verdict had to be
double speed
on the evidence that you saw and that was presented to you in this case. You also heard that the defense did not have to bring a case at all, didn't have to bring any witnesses at all.
Sorry, 1.5 times speed.
You've heard that you can make reasonable inferences, again, solely based on the evidence. But what you can't do is what you just heard Mr. Harris do. Mr. Harris spent his entire time speculating, making up things that could have happened, maybe could have happened, based nothing on the 404 exhibits that the state brought you and the 12 exhibits that the defense brought you. Nothing that he said was corroborated by anything, the exhibits or the 32 witnesses that we brought you and the 4 witnesses that he brought you. Nothing. Nothing at all. Ms. Dykes took the stand, and when you assess witness credibility, the first thing you need to do is see, is their testimony making sense? Is it backed up by anybody else's testimony? And in this case, she swore on direct and swore on cross over and over and over again that she had no romantic or sexual relationship with Charles Beltran. Yet in her phone, that she is on talking to someone when she gets arrested in March of 2021, March 26th, his name is Lover.
That's all I can say to that. Really? I remember when she was testifying, and I thought, I guess when I heard her testifying, I didn't think she was denying a sexual relationship with him. But when I went back and rewatched the testimony, I realized she was. I cannot, for the life of me, understand why a defense attorney would allow his client to go on the witness stand with evidence like that, where her name is listed in, his name is listed in her phone as lover, and they're calling each other love, it gets worse. When I realized that, that is in fact what she was saying on the witness stand, I realized, what, at that moment, that jury tuned out everything, because, once you put the defendant on the stand, it's about whether you believe the defendant. And in this case, they were trying to contrast Lisa Dykes with Charles Beltran. Charles Beltran was the star witness in this case who testified that he witnessed her kill a woman that he was sleeping with. They had an open relationship. Charles Beltran testified that Lisa Dykes wanted to close that open relationship and that he was not supposed to have any women come over to the house anymore. He defied her, and apparently that night he says she came in with a knife and, in a rage, stabbed the woman that he brought home to the house. And the defense, of course, was trying to suggest, well, no, Lisa Dykes wouldn't do that. She's this upstanding woman, mother of 3, and Charles Beltran, who has a criminal record, history of violence, that whatever happened to this girl was at his hands and not Lisa Dykes. The problem is when you're trying to make that contrast, and she's lying, and then there's other suspicious activity that this prosecutor is going to go through that she did. She sunk her case. And had she not testified, I think she would have had a potential shot if her attorney would have really honed in on the idea that everything runs through Charles Beltran, and the physical evidence was definitely not clear on what happened in that room. But by putting her on the stand, it didn't matter. None of that mattered. I just don't understand. It mystifies me. Anyways, let's get back to the testimony.
She chose that name for him. Yet she sat up there and lied to you. No, he was just a business investment. If she can't give you the truth about that one thing that everybody knows that here, she's not going to give you the truth about anything. Anything at all. Let's read this conversation. She reaches out to lover, Charles Beltran, and says, "Hey, love, we good?" Takes some time before he responds, and so she says, "Yes, not." She wants to know, has he said anything yet? She knows he's the one that knows what she did to Marisela Botello in that room. He's the one that knows, and she kept him close for months. That was her choice. She is not the victim here. Marisela is the victim. We good, yes, not. Finally, he responds and says, "Yeah." "You?" She says, "Yep, I'm still hanging on. Attorney's seeing the wife today." He says, "Okay." She sat up there and told you she didn't have a choice about Charles Beltran, but yet her next message is, "I really wish we were together." It's hard to watch your own back. And tells him you can't trust anybody either. He says, "I know."
And once again, it mystifies me how, knowing that this is in the record, knowing that messages like this exist, that she would believe it was a smart decision to have gotten up on the witness stand and have testified like she did. What would have made more sense to the jury would have absolutely been that she was under the control of Mr. Beltran, that he was a womanizer, that she was being abused by him, And that, in fact, what you were seeing there was the side effects of an abusive relationship, because that's ultimately the story they tried to half tell. But they tried to tell it as if he was simply a business investment and that was it. And there was no sexual relationship. Apparently, she didn't want to claim that. And she couldn't get away with that. She had to, insane. And she got convicted. And you know what? I think she's guilty. I think the state proved this case as it happened. And I first had a little issue believing Charles Beltran when I first heard his testimony, but after I reflected on everything and started thinking about this case, it all makes sense that this is exactly what happened, because he really doesn't come across. And there was a whole lot of women that came onto the witness stand that he was in contact with. Not one of them described him as a violent guy towards them in a way that he's going to go out to a nightclub, bring a woman home, and kill her. It just makes no sense. Now, could it have been that she overdosed or something like that? That was where I was like, you know what? Nobody knows what happened in that room. But when she got on the stand and testified, none of it mattered. Again, and I don't understand why attorneys allow their clients to testify. Now, again, it may have been out of this attorney's hands. He may have advised her against it. But it seemed to me like he knew she was going to testify the entire trial. And I think it was a tremendous mistake. A tremendous mistake.
No. Love. And then he does what Chuck does and asks for money. He needs to change vehicles. That Jeep that she said was hers, but that he has and drove to Dallas and to New Orleans before he went to Utah, that's in his possession, not hers. He needs a new car. She says, yes, as soon as I see the attorney. I had to pay him up front, big gamble, but there doesn't seem to be any issue as long as she signs off. Use your reasonable inference. That right there is evidence. You can use a reasonable inference as to who she's talking about. She's talking about Nina. Nina's arrested and sitting in jail in Miami while she ran to Orlando. She said, I called the jail myself. What did they say? They got warrants for capital murder on all three of us. Now, Lisa Dykes has sworn to you she didn't know what happened to Marisela Botello or where she was or anything else. Look at that message right there. She said she thought she was out and about on a bender, going to prostitution motels and things like that. Supposedly, they found her. She's talking about Marisela because they found her body just 2 days before. She knows the gig is up. She knows the gig is up. And she's got to get the heck out of Orlando. She's not worried about Nina. She's worried about getting her money. It says, but the attorney says they're building a case. They don't have evidence. They are guessing. I'm hoping she kept her shit together. She wants you to think that she cares about Nina? That she thinks Nina's on suicide watch, and so she's hoping she keeps her shit together in that way? No, she hopes that Nina keeps it together and doesn't talk. That's what the evidence shows. I need to get out of the state real quick. She's not trying to turn herself in. She's trying to run again. Ask Chuck, how much money do you need? How much can you send? I need to make moves. She says, I have no idea how much there is until I get her shit, Nina's shit. She wants you to believe that she wasn't using Nina for money? She's trying to get her shit. She's not talking about trying to get Nina out of jail. She's not talking about trying to help Nina, about caring about Nina, about being worried about Nina. She's talking about getting her shit so she can get out of the state. I'm trying to go to our fave spot that I wanted to live for a minute. You think you could get to me there? This woman that testified to you that she was so terrified she felt like she didn't have a choice is asking Chuck, asking this man that she's obsessed with, if he can get there to her. Or do I need to come get you? Says, I thought you got paid today. I did. This guy was $2,000 to get the money off of Nina. Who's she worried about? She's worried about herself. She's worried about Chuck. She's not worried about Nina, but she's worried about getting that money. He just called me. What'd he say? Question mark? Mom, she's arrested. The gig is up. Lisa Dykes sat up there and told you that Chuck was just a business investment. She told you that she had lived with family, and Jimmy, her brother, said, yeah, I mean, she was there for us. That's what family does. We get each other's back. We do that. She helped me, and everything was going really well in Mesquite with all of them when all of a sudden, just weeks before, she tells Chelsea and Aaron and Jimmy that they've got to move out. just weeks before she met Charles Beltran. She tells Kat De Leon, I can't live the lifestyle I want to live with them here. Not I want them to spread their wings and fly, not that I want them to take care of themselves. I can't live the lifestyle I want to live with them here. And what you see is the evolution of Lisa Dykes right there from when prior to when she met Charles Beltran all the way through to the bottom. Full tattoos, new haircut, platinum hair, makeup. The last hair appointment she had with Kat, she changes her appearance again, bright pink. She still has the scars from her facelift that Nina paid for. Nose rings. This is the willing evolution of a woman that was obsessed with a young, much younger man that was in the rap scene and in the bar scene, and this is what she thought he wanted her to look like. So that's what she did. That's what she did. But let's talk a little bit about the Lisa Dykes or Lisa Beltran that you met here in court. She was quiet. She was soft-spoken. Her attorney even said, pull that microphone up so we can hear you. Had that little country accent. All of those things. This woman has 37 years of experience in the courtroom. She knows the legal system. She's a negotiator. She's strong. She knows what she's doing. She's successful. Woman that when she was confronted in Cambodia in a foreign country by 4 Cambodian officers dressed in SWAT gear and 4 Cambodian officers dressed in uniform and 1 FBI agent looked that woman straight in the eye and said, what jurisdiction do you have here? That's the Lisa Dykes that killed Marisela Botello, not the one that came here to court today. Because see, she can change who she is for the circumstance. She wants to control the circumstances. When we talk about motive, it's not like she was so jealous of each of these women that he brought home that she wanted to kill them all. It was all about control. She had told Chuck no more. She had told him no more. And yet he continued to not listen to her. And let's talk about the time frame that we are talking about. We're talking about in October when she had just spent all this money on Chuck for a rap concert on October 4th, or October 3rd in Arkansas. The van, the spot, the hotel rooms, the booze. She's walking around in the club. She's getting around just fine. She's done that all for him. All for him. And how does he repay her? Does exactly what she told him not to do. This last slide, ladies and gentlemen, you heard Kat De Leon talk about her hair was always platinum. Always platinum, maybe some streaks of blonde, something bright. This is what she chose to do for her appearance when she was in Florida. Make no mistake about it. She is trying to hide. She is trying to change her appearance, and she's not trying to be found by the FBI, by the Dallas Police Department, by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, by anybody. Now, again, Ms. Dykes, this chart shows the nexus between all the witnesses that were called in this case and the people talked about in this case and how they were related to each other. Ms. Dykes got the benefit of hearing every single person in here talk. And what did she say? Of course, she starts with Charles Beltran's a liar. We'll get to his testimony in just a minute. But Charles Beltran's a liar. Her brother's a liar. Her coworker, Olivia Martinez, is a liar. Kat De Leon, her hairdresser of years, she's a liar. Jamie Scarpa, that she's met one time, that woman's a liar. Chuck's girlfriends are all liars. Freddie Chapman, when he says that she's driving, he's a liar. And so is Dax Stevens. The only person you don't see marked with liars, the only person that did show up, and that's Kyle Williams and his girlfriend, Valerie Sanders. Heard the call about why he didn't show up, because she told him not to. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Ms. Dykes talked about her medical records yesterday proving what I don't know. She had a hard time with this thigh surgery? Sure. If you read through this, what you'll find is that you have a non-compliant patient, a person who wants to be in control, is not listening to the doctors and causing her own problems. But more specifically, when you look at the appointment date on 9/22/2020, that's September 22nd, 2020, it talks about how on that day she's discussing with the individual that is looking at her. The notes indicate that Ms. Dykes tells her on that weekend, I have a trip to Los Angeles planned. That weekend is not October 3rd. We're talking about September 22nd, 2020. That weekend is September 26th, 2020. She had a trip to Los Angeles planned with Nina that weekend. But what she told you is that, oh, no, we didn't actually plan on going to Arkansas. That was because we had to cancel our trip for October 3rd that we were going to take to Los Angeles because the doctor told me I had to. And you can read through these notes yourself, but that particular appointment the medical professional tells her, look, you don't need to go this weekend on your trip. And
again, another lie. I mean, this woman gets on a witness stand and lies about when she had a trip planned, knowing that the state had that evidence already there. Why? Why not just say, hey, you know what? Again, she was under the control of Charles, right? And he brings this woman home. Whatever happens, happens. She just testifies, hey, I wasn't jealous. I loved him. I was okay with the open relationship. He's making this up. I was okay with what we had. I'm married to another woman. I have him. But stupidly, when he got in trouble, I wanted to bail him out because that's the typical thing. That's what she could have testified to. That's what could have made sense. Instead, she says, oh, no, I've had no sexual relationship with him. I had no love interest in him at all. And yet the state was able to just absolutely lambaste her and destroy her on that point. And by destroying her on that point, she destroyed whatever credibility that she had left. And now, now when the jury says, well, I don't believe you, now it doesn't matter about reasonable doubt. Because now they just don't believe her. They flat out don't believe her. She's lied to them multiple times. And now it's like, you're going to come up on the witness stand and just directly lie to our eyes, directly lie to us. That's why it took an hour and a half. I mean, again, it's just so ridiculous that she did this. But it's what she did. And there's really not, there's not much we can do here. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Unbelievable. So anyways, let's get back to it. And
insistent that she was going to go. What you're going to find from those medical records as well is that on October 2nd of 2020, not October 3rd of 2020, as Ms. Dykes said, but October 2nd, she had a follow-up appointment, and the doctor's notes indicate everything seems fine, and they didn't schedule another follow-up appointment until December. If she was in that kind of pain, as she had described to you all, don't you think they would be seeing her on a regular basis? But at that point, everything is starting to come back together. Everything is starting to be fine, so much so that she can go to Arkansas, drive 4 hours in a car, walk around the club, and party with a bunch of younger men at a rap concert, at a rap show. In October 2020, Lisa wants you to think that all of these are coincidences. That she renewed her lease, which shows that she intended to be there for a full year, although she testified that, hey, we were already planning on going to Florida. Her lease documents show otherwise. She's planning on being in Texas for a while. That on October 5th, she calls in for an unknown reason. That's the day that Marisela is supposed to return. That's the day that she goes missing, and she calls into work, unexplained. Her call records show her down in Wilmington. Coincidence that the very next day, her wife, Nina, is desperately searching passport offices. How to get a passport fast. How to change your name on a passport fast. The very next day. Lisa's hair in her last appointment goes pink, and there's continued passport Google searches. The very first news article that comes out about Marisela is a WFFA news article on October 11th. Nina urgently wants to sell her Pennsylvania home the very next day. Calls Jamie Scarpa and says, I need to list it today. Not in a week, not let's sit down and talk about it today. That's just a coincidence. Lisa gets a phone call from the FBI. She tells all her coworkers, oh, it's fraud, it's fraud. It wasn't a real person. But tells that FBI agent that she could see on the Ring camera was legit and tells him, I haven't seen him in some time. I don't know where he is. I don't know his number. I don't know how to get a hold of him. The very first time she's contacted by law enforcement, she lies. And then the very next day, she quits. Unexplained, out of the blue, according to her coworker. Is that just a coincidence, too? These are all just in October. October 31st, that first search warrant in the Kensington house looked like they had moved quickly. It was abandoned, property left there. But the blood had been cleaned up. That blood had been cleaned up for sure. And that's her house. Make no mistake about it. She knows what goes on in her house. She's in control of what goes on in her house. When we're discussing the phone records that put her in Wilmer,
again, I understand to a degree why she felt like she had to testify to try to explain these things. But when your explanation is a lie, right? And you're trying to explain these things by saying they're just all coincidences. And again, she claimed that all these things happened. See, what the prosecutor's pointing out here is all of these things happened between the 5th and the 14th. And she claims she didn't know anything about what happened until the 14th, when the FBI calls her and leaves her a message and says, hey, we need to talk to Charles Beltran. And that's the first time she becomes aware that this Marisela lady is missing. See, she didn't want to say she had knowledge because she understands that they can then charge her with tampering. But see, that's what punishable up to 20 years. I would have rolled the dice and said, listen, here's the deal. I wasn't present. I didn't tamper with the body. But after the fact, Charles tells me he's in some trouble, that he was with this girl, that the police are coming after him, that some bad people did something to her. And instead of, I should have called the police right away, but I didn't. I started helping Charles. I started doing things to help him for the simple fact that I was under his spell. And started putting things in motion that I knew I was so in love with Charles Beltran. So was Nina. And our plan was to try to go on the run together and liquidate all of our assets and throw it all on the line for Charles. I mean, to me, that would have been a better story than what she tried to come up with here. Or better yet, I think the best strategy here would have been to remain silent. She'd done that already till date. And trying to explain it away made it worse, because as this prosecutor is sitting up here, she's saying, she lied to you about X, she lied to you about Y, and now she's telling you all these things are coincidences. There's only one reason why she's lying to you. Boom. And had she never lied, the state would have had to stand up here and say, hey, we have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. There's this coincidence, there's that coincidence. And the defense can say, listen, we don't have to put anything up. It's the state's job to prove beyond a reasonable doubt what these coincidences mean. And it doesn't mean anything. It could mean that it was, it doesn't mean that she did the crime. It means she knew about it. It means she was trying to help Charles Beltran because she knew Charles was involved in this and she wanted to help her man. And she was in love with him and she cared about him and she had deep feelings for him. Like, that would have been a better defense. And they could have put forth those arguments in closing arguments and suggested that those were reasonable explanations for the behavior, which again is by definition a reasonable doubt. Does a reasonable explanation exist? And if it does, then the jury is to attribute that to the defendant. And that is as reasonable when you put Charles Beltran up on the stand and say, this guy lied to you. Why is he lying? What is he hiding? Instead, they flip this thing around, put her on a witness stand, let her lie to the jury, and now nobody cares that Charles Beltran lied. Because guess what? At the end of the day, the jury's left with one thing. She lied to him. Face to face, eye to eye, right there in that courtroom. Unbelievable. Anyways, let's keep watching here.
this shows earlier that day that they are all in the same area at that Kensington home. And if you'll recall, Mark Sedgwick talking about the time that the green arc, that timing advance record, that is a different record that you get from Marisela's phone because it's a different provider, and that's almost real time. And you see right there in the middle, she's at that house. That yellow square indicates the Kensington, 3113 Kensington house. She's there. She's there with Chuck. Then you see the next day, you heard Chuck's testimony. He left out of there, and he didn't go back that day. And his phone records support that. He tells you he went to get an oil change, that he hung out at Carmen's apartment in the parking lot, that he never saw her. Then he went down and got an oil change. And then he goes on and hangs out in the Deep Ellum area later that night. And you heard corroborating testimony about all of that. But here's the interesting slide. That red square right there, that is the location where Marisela Botello's remains were found. And if you recall Mark Sedgwick's testimony, that the azimuth is kind of the direct line where you see that V. The azimuth is that kind of direct line, and that indicates the direction which those cell phones are pinging from. So they're within that little angle right there. And these are all the pings of Lisa's phone during that time period. They start at 6:36, then you have one at 6:43, 6:50 for Nina's phone, 7:02, 7:07, 7:16, 7:22, 7:38. And each and every one of those, that azimuth is pointing towards the location where Marisela Botello's body was found. She wants you to think she was at a FedEx place in Hutchins. There's Hutchins right there. That's Hutchins. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 other towers that if they were really in Hutchins, at that FedEx distribution location, those cell phones would have been pinging off of there. But no, they are within that area of where Marisela Botello's body was found. 2 turns, 2 miles from where she used to live. A left on Beltline, a left on Post Oak. Just off the road where you can park and pull a body just a short distance off the road behind brush. She didn't think anybody was going to find her before the animals had gotten to her, before her body decomposed completely. And so, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what I'm going to ask you to do with that is don't give her the benefit of her tampering with the corpse because she chose to dump that body out there where she knew nobody was going to look, and it was decomposed so they couldn't do a full autopsy on her. Don't give her that benefit and speculate that just because of that, there's no way to tell from the autopsy exactly how she died. You know how she died because Chuck told you how she died. And the story makes sense. When it comes to Charles Beltran, we brought you his testimony, but we didn't bring you his testimony uncorroborated. We didn't just throw him up there and say, tell your story, and just leave it at that. There are 404 pieces of evidence that back up his story. Not only that, you have 32 witnesses that the state calls to corroborate bits and pieces of the story. There's not one person that can corroborate everything, but each person can corroborate something. And so let's start with that. Let's start with Raul Ortiz said that she left there and left his place at approximately 1 a.m. or so, 12:30, 1 a.m. because he got sick. And she took a lift down to Deep Ellum. That's corroborated by the fact that the surveillance video shows her walking around by herself. And then she meets Chuck. And you see that surveillance video of her and Chuck meeting, and you can tell she wants to go with him. Was it a smart choice? Of course not. Was it a choice that a young 23-year-old that is trusting of human nature and trusting of people would make in that scenario? Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a tragedy that she didn't know who she was going to be having to deal with later. Chuck did what he always did. You heard from Dax, you heard from Freddie, and they're like, man, this guy, 5 minutes, and he is talking to a woman, and he's taking her home. And he doesn't have to force himself on anyone. He doesn't. And guess what? If she didn't want to have sex with him, it's fine. He's got plenty of other women that do. But this girl was cool, and they were hanging out, and they were having a good time, just like he always does, just like normal. You heard from Kat De Leon about Chuck and Lisa's relationship, and also you heard that Lisa was livid when she learned that Nina had slept with Chuck without her. Make no mistake about it, Lisa wants to control this relationship between her and Chuck. That is her prize, that is her possession, that is her boy toy. She's the one that pays for everything, she's the one that invests in his rap career, she's the one that brought this man in, and she wants to have control over that. Yes, the 3 of them were together. Yes, the 3 of them had sexual relationships together. Yes, she and Chuck had sexual relationships together. But when Nina did it with him, That was not okay. She was livid. And you know that to be true because two people that have never met, that didn't know each other, said that Lisa said the same thing. Olivia Martinez said that when she found out about Chuck and Lisa, she was livid. She said, quotation marks, "I'm going to make Nina my bitch. I'm going to make her do anything I say." I take a body to Wilmer after you killed an innocent girl because you want to control the situation? Lisa is the one that got Nina involved in this. As far as what we talked about, what the defense talked about, Chuck's fear is real. He's a young black man, covered in tattoos, that's his choice. Two-time felon, that's his choice. He pled guilty to those offenses, he served his time, and he was out. But when he looked at it, when he ran from that situation, as his girlfriend Jasmine said he always would, as he always did, which is in his nature, which Dax Stevens said, that's how Chuck deals with conflict. He doesn't fight, he runs. And Freddie said, that's how Chuck is. He doesn't fight. He's a lover, he's a player, but he's not a fighter. He runs. He ran from that situation, and the further that he ran from it, the bigger it got. He told you, he testified on that witness stand, look, I look like the bad guy. I look like who they would be looking for. But I'm not him. I didn't murder this girl. And he had no reason, no motive whatsoever to do anything to Marisela Botello. Defense makes a pretty big issue about the fact that her forefront teeth were missing. And you heard Dr. Casper talk about that the way that those teeth were missing, that they were fully out. They were completely gone, as if they were extracted from her mouth. Not a punch in the mouth with broken teeth. Those are inconsistent. When you get punched in the mouth, your teeth break and you bleed. They don't just fall out of your head.
Did you want to check this in the statement of evidence in this case?
Overruled, the jury will recall the testimony as they heard.
They don't just fall out of your head. You are allowed to use your common sense. You don't have to check that in when you are looking at the evidence and listening to the arguments and weighing things against each other. If anything like that happened to Marisela, her teeth would be broken, not completely missing. You understand that there was a lot of animal activity out there. There's a lot of reasons why those teeth might be missing. Her skull might not have been right where it was laying, where it sat when they found it, but it was definitely in that vicinity. Unfortunately, because it was March when they found her body, they couldn't find everything to give you a full picture. Chuck's story makes sense because the DNA evidence corroborates that. This is Chuck's room. You see the two windows right there? You see the blue purplish spot right there where the carpet is. That is where he testified that after Lisa stabbed Marisela, he woke up in his deep sleep. He'd been drinking, he'd been smoking a little bit of weed. He wasn't sure it was real at first. And thank you. And his reaction was to shove her off the bed, and Marisela came tumbling down onto the floor with Lisa. And then he jumped over and he pushed them apart. That stain from the carpet.
Now, in my opinion, what you just saw there, that stain on the carpet is the strongest evidence that could suggest that Lisa Dykes didn't do what Charles Beltran said she did. What you're seeing there is a chemical agent that reacts to blood. And they put this all over the house. And that is the only spot in the house that has any reaction. That little spot on the carpet. So if you're to believe that a brutal murder takes place where she's being stabbed, as Charles Beltran claimed, in the chest, and she's stabbing her, and then Charles Beltran pushes them off the bed. They both roll onto the floor. This girl is covered in blood. An altercation between Beltran and Dykes occurs, allegedly, according to his story, that he puts her up against the wall. I mean, there should be blood all over that room. There should be spatter all over that room. And even if you, as the criminal has testified in this case, even if you try to clean up blood, that it's going to react to that chemical agent, even if it's been cleaned up, because you can't fully clean up blood to the naked eye. It won't be there. You might get It might not be present. You might not be seeing it with the naked eye, but it's going to react because it's very difficult to clean up blood to the point that it doesn't react when they put that chemical agent that this prosecutor's talking about. So to me, again, this is why we don't need her to testify. We don't need her to talk about what she did or didn't do, because that's the biggest thing right there that you would want the jury to focus on. Charles Beltran just told you a story. The defense doesn't have to prove anything. As the judge instructed the jury, the presumption of innocence alone is enough for a not guilty verdict. A lot of people don't realize that. What does that mean? That means that the defense doesn't have to put on a case at all. That means that if the state, at the very beginning of the case, if the state, for some reason, chose to not put a case on, and the defense didn't put a case on, and they said, go back to that jury room and render a verdict, the only verdict that could come down at that moment is not guilty, because that alone is enough for a not guilty. The state has to overcome the presumption of innocence. Everything stems from a presumption of innocence. She is presumed innocent the moment she walks in that courtroom until the moment the jury reviews the evidence and decides that there are no reasonable doubts. There are no doubts. There are no reasonable doubts. What is reasonable doubt? Reasonable doubt is a reasonable explanation that exists for how the crime could have occurred, that says there's another possible way that this could have happened that doesn't involve the defendant. And if it's reasonable and it exists, the defense doesn't have to prove it actually happened. They just have to prove that it's possible, that it's reasonable that it could have occurred in another way, and you get a not guilty verdict. And that should have been the focus of the defense here. But too many times do defense attorneys believe they actually have to prove something. And I think the issue here was her attorney was a former prosecutor, and he was reverse prosecuting here. He was prosecuting Charles Beltran, and he wanted to prove Charles Beltran guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and he lost track of the idea that he wasn't here to do that. All he had to do was raise a doubt as to whether or not Lisa Dykes was in fact the perpetrator of this crime. And he should have been able to easily done that. And had he properly presented things, just like we have with the Hannah Payne case, had that been properly presented, the client might be walking out. The client very well might be walking out. But again, it's too much of these times that defense attorneys want to go in and prove something. And my dad and I have had numerous discussions on this point, because he one of the winningest attorneys, defense attorneys in the state that he practiced in. And that was because he focused on the fact that the state had the burden, and that when his client and he walked into the courtroom, the presumption of innocence was cloaked. His client was cloaked in a presumption of innocence, and it was the state's requirement to remove that. And he had no obligation whatsoever to prove anything. And that stands. It's the state that's got to do something. It's the state that's got to put the evidence on. So let's get back to it here and watch the conclusion to the closing arguments.
That piece is exactly where Marisela's blood was found. Her DNA was found. So the physical evidence corroborates what he says. The phone evidence corroborates what he says happened after that. The records of Pennsylvania, Mexico, Miami, all of those things corroborate Chuck Beltran's testimony, and not one thing of any of this here and any of those witnesses back her up. And she won't even know that she has a relationship. Mr. Brown said Marisela deserved better than that. Of course she did. She's beautiful. She's full of life. She has dreams. She has hope. She has aspiration. She has to go to work on October 6th. And they want to speculate that she suddenly, within 24 hours of meeting Charles Beltran, became a tweaker, a prostitute, and a drug addict, and was wandering around in Dallas, a place that she doesn't even know. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is just not reasonable. Not reasonable at all. You know that she was killed on October 5th, 2020, because that's the only reasonable conclusion that the evidence supports. Marisela Botello deserves the 12 of you, the 2 alternates, to weigh the facts and the evidence in this case and to come to the verdict of guilty. But you know who deserves that more? Lisa Dykes. Lisa Dykes is guilty of murder and guilty of tampering with a corpse. And when your verdict of guilty is read out loud in the courtroom, you're not telling her anything that she doesn't already know. We're asking for a guilty verdict on both charges in this case on behalf of the Dallas County community, the family of Marisela Botello, and our victim, Marisela Botello Valdez. Thank you. Ma'am, just state your name and...
So there you have it, guys. As I said, I believe 110% that this case was lost because of the lies that happened on the witness stand. And it's a shame because it was a winnable case. It was a very winnable case. But they chose to do too much. And this happens from time to time. Well, not time to time. It happens more times than not when from my observations of the justice process. And it's this idea that defense attorneys forget that they are not obligated to prove anything. They are only obligated to come in and raise questions and concerns about the evidence. And if there's something they can prove, prove it. That's what my dad instilled in me when you're watching these cases is if you're going to take on the burden of proving something, you better damn well be able to prove it. And you better be able to prove it. And if you can't, then you don't take on that burden. You don't ever assume the burden as a defense attorney unless you know you can do it. It's just like you don't ever ask a question you don't know the answer to. Because that's just courtroom 101. You never do that. If you don't know the answer, you don't ask the question. Just like you don't go and try to prove something. You don't put your client on the stand if you know that she's going to lie. If you know that everything that's going to come out of her mouth is going to be a lie, a lie, a lie, a lie, a lie, and a lie again. And it's mystifying to me that they would do that. Anyways, we're going to conclude this live stream with the conclusion of the case. So I figured the best way to conclude this thing is we're going to take a look at the verdict, because what happens next, an hour and a half later, this happens.
Jury. When you all were in Fort Dyer, we discussed that your verdict had to be based on the evidence that you saw.
Hold on. I thought I had it queued up, everybody. I apologize. We got to... All right, guys, here we go. Sorry about the delay there.
may be seated. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the court has received your jury verdicts. All right. Ms. Dykes, please stand. The jury verdicts read as follows. We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, Lisa Jo Dykes, guilty of murder as charged in the indictment. For the second case, we, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, Lisa Jo Dykes, guilty of tampering with physical evidence as charged in the indictment. Both verdicts are signed by the presiding juror, and the name is also printed. You may be seated.
So there you have it, guys. That was the guilty verdict, and then the jury then considered sentence. They got the opportunity to sentence Ms. Dykes, and here we go. Check this out.
The verdict reads as follows. We, the jury, having heretofore found the defendant, Lisa Jo Dykes, guilty of the offense of murder as charged in the indictment, and not having found by a preponderance of the evidence that such offense occurred while the defendant was under the immediate influence of sudden passion arising from adequate cause, assess her punishment at life in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice and a fine of $10,000. The second verdict reads as follows. We, the jury, having found the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of the offense of tampering with physical evidence as charged in the indictment, assess her punishment at confinement in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for 20 years. In addition thereto, assess a fine in the amount of $10,000. Both verdicts are signed by the presiding juror. Mr. Harris, is there any reason in law why your client cannot now be sentenced?
There is not, Judge.
That it is the order and judgment and decree of the court in cause number F2175476, Lisa Jo Dykes, in conforming with the jury's verdict, I hereby sentence you to life in prison and a fine of $10,000. In cause number F2175651, tampering with physical evidence, I sentence you to 20 years in prison and a fine of $10,000. I order you taken by the sheriff and by her safely held until you can be transferred to an authorized receiving agent to begin your sentence in TDCJ. Ms. Dykes, I hope that you find that you've been treated.
So there you have it, guys. She was sentenced to life in prison. I'm sorry I cut the judge off there, but she was saying that she hopes that she finds she was treated better than she treated Marisela. And I hope she does, because I think in this case, this is one of those cases where I do believe the jury got it right. I think she did this. And I think it makes sense. I think it makes 100% sense when you consider all of the evidence in its entirety. And I watched this entire case. I'm going to do a little bit more analysis on this. But I didn't do my live analysis as I was watching it, because it was one of these deals where I was watching this case a lot at night. I was watching on double speed. But when I first started this case, I started out thinking, okay, she's guilty. That was just my own bias coming in, because I remember hearing about this case and her fleeing, and that made me right away think. And then I listened to the openings, and then I started listening to, I started listening to witnesses in it, and I'm like, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing a lot of evidence showing that she did anything in that room. There's nothing really directly linking her. And then Chuck testifies, and I wasn't impressed at all with him. I thought, this guy's lying out his teeth. He's lying. What he says doesn't make sense. And then the physical evidence and the crime scene analysts come up, and then you've got the fact that they're hiding the lead investigator. The state didn't call the lead investigator, and I'm like, wow, this is crazy. And the lead investigator destroyed a bunch of inadvertently destroyed, or says she inadvertently destroyed some digital media that had to do with this case, that some of it had body cam footage of interviews that were done of people who said they saw her after the 5th of October. And I'm thinking, man, this is a weak case. And then the state rests. And I'm like, man, this is a weak case. There's a lot of reasonable doubt here. What is the defense going to do with this? And there's a lot the defense could have done, none of which involved putting the witness or the defendant on the stand. And then the defense starts out a little bit strong. I mean, I kind of was like, They put the lead investigator on. And I wasn't impressed at all with how they handled the direct on that. Because it was kind of weak. It was like, why did you put her on? I mean, she comes on. There was no big moment. Heath Harris comes on and says, well, I put her on the stand because this is one of the worst conducted investigations. Okay. It would have been, again, why did you prove that? Why did you put her on the stand? You don't have an obligation to prove how bad the investigation was. The fact that they didn't call a lead investigator raises doubt about that. It raises a question. So why did you answer that question? Because what happens is, this is a case where I believe if the defense would have stood up and said, we're resting, sat back down and argued to the jury that said, listen, we don't know what happened here. We know there's some blood in a bedroom that isn't Lisa Dykes. We know that she's upset about something. We know there's a relationship. We know she's giving this man money. We know she's married to another woman. We know that he's taking advantage of her. We know that this guy's got a criminal record. We know this guy's a womanizer. But we also know that there is no link between Marisela and Lisa Dykes. There's no physical evidence that puts Marisela in that room. The only person who put Marisela in that room was Chuck. And if you put Chuck up on the stand, the only thing I would have done if I'm presenting any case at all is put people on the stand who could discredit Chuck. I would have put someone on the stand who says, hey, looking around that room and analyzing that room, this does not appear to be consistent with Chuck's story. I would never have put her on the stand, especially if she was going to lie, unless she had a story to tell that was bulletproof, unless she was going up to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, and that there was no way that the state could do what they did, which was absolutely decimate her story on cross-examination and then absolutely destroy her story in the final presentation to the jury moments before they're going back to the jury room. And having served on a jury, I know how important that is. I know that those final words from the state are the last thing you're hearing. And it makes a big impact. And to be able to have stood before them and said, hey, just like she did, she lied to you. She had an opportunity to come up. She lied to you. She didn't just lie to you. She lied to you about obvious things that were so clearly lies. Even a blind person could have seen it without even being able to see. They would have known that the thing she was lying about, she was lying about. And it's absolutely horrible, horrible, horrible that the defense allowed her on the witness stand, and that that Heath Harris would have allowed her to sit up on that witness stand and lie to the jury about obvious things. And it blows my mind, but it also validates why she was found guilty in 1.5 hours. That was no surprise. That was no shock to me once I went back and realized and watched that closing argument and realized exactly how bad she did on that witness stand. Because I was in the middle of watching that today when the verdict came down, because I was a little bit behind. And I thought, wow, that is insane. That really is. So anyways, I'm going to continue to report a little bit on this. I think we're going to watch her testimony together. I'm going to put that up because this is just disturbing to me when you see attorneys decide to start proving things that they don't have to prove. This was a case, in my opinion, that when the state rested, was ripe with reasonable doubt. And they destroyed and decimated every doubt, every reasonable doubt, by putting on a case and answering questions and trying to prove things that they didn't have to prove. And they put her right into the penitentiary for the rest of her life. And hey, you know what? I think she belongs there. I'm not upset over it. I'm not losing sleep over it. The justice process worked here. She'll get her appeal. I recommend that she absolutely, whatever money she has left, she gets a good lawyer. And they look at ineffective assistance to counsel. And you look at what the hell her attorneys were doing in that courtroom and why in the world they would put her on the witness stand to go up and lie about obvious things. Anyways, guys, we're going to leave it at that. It's a little late night edition here. I wanted to do here for the Lisa Dykes trial. And, I'll be back with some more coverage. I'm going to do some coverage here on the Hannah Payne case that just happened down in Georgia. We're going to talk about that case. We're going to watch clips and things of it because it's quite an interesting one as well. It's another one that I believe the attorney bungled. We're going to talk about it. That's coming up. And, remember, justice is always better, always works better when watched. And in the meantime, until we talk again, let justice prevail, and I'll talk to you soon.